What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing well. Welcome to the extended cut, minimally edited podcast version of this week's episode, where we're going to tackle your questions related to side hustles. It's been a little while since I've talked about it. I think I've kind of shied away from it a bit because some of my prior videos where I talk about my personal side hustle get some not so kind comments saying like, wait, so you're saying I need to become a YouTuber because my side hustle involves YouTubing, but it doesn't mean that I think anyone who wants to do a side hustle needs to become a YouTuber. So clearly I needed to process some of my feelings. I'm fine. It's fine. We're here. We're going to talk about side hustles, all the side hustles, not just YouTubing. And so to get a kind of pulse of things, I thought I would put out a poll on Instagram inviting you all to submit your questions related to side hustles just to see what's on your minds. What are you wondering about? And in today's episode, I'm going to try my best, at least, to answer your questions. In the extended version of today's episode, I'm sure there will be way more rambles, but hopefully also just a lot more details, a lot more anecdotes and things like that. So if you're into having all of those details, then this episode is for you. If you don't like Ramble Marie, I totally understand because sometimes I have trouble listening to Ramble Marie, then I'm sure I'll tidy this thing up in the official version of the episode. I'll link to that below in case that's more your cup of tea. Okay, now I'll be honest, as I look through your questions that you submitted in the Q&A, I had to have like a little moment where I realized that my understanding of the definition of side hustle is different than the actual definition of side hustle. Do you all ever have that happen to you with stuff in life where you think you understand what a term is and then something like this comes up and you realize, I think I misunderstood this term? I don't know. My understanding of a side hustle historically has been when you create a context that generates extra income. Like it could include something like freelancing in my mind, but it might not include something like, picking up an extra shift per week for an employer, for example. However, I stand corrected because according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, their definition of side hustle is, quote, work performed for income supplementary to one's primary job. So anything you do outside of your typical work that generates income, according to the dictionary, is a side hustle, and your questions largely reflect that. So here I learned that, I maybe didn't understand exactly what a side hustle is, I guess. I don't know. Leave a comment. Let me know what your understanding of side hustles are. I wonder if it's like a regional thing, or maybe that was like a capsule in time. Like when I started this side hustle, it meant one thing, and now I don't know. But we're going to answer your questions from Instagram regardless, and it'll be fun. It'll be fun. Now, far and away, the most frequently asked category of question that you all asked about is like, what are some of the side hustles therapists can do? Here someone says, what options are there other than therapy for another company? There are a lot of options. Someone else says, what could be possible side hustles for therapists? And someone says, what are some of the side hustles therapists can do? I think this is a great question, and the answer is honestly so expansive that I could probably do an entire episode just on that. I'm not an expert on all the different side hustles, but fortunately there are people who've compiled lists of like some of the most common types of side hustles. So what I'll do is I'll link below to an article from Heard that I think is quite comprehensive and covering like all the side hustles that I've heard about pretty much. So you can scroll through that list and see if anything in that list is a good fit for you. But just to kind of like rattle off a bunch really quickly, here are some of the examples they list out. In addition to therapy, they refer to coaching, supervision, case consultation, clinical assessment, consulting, writing, speaking, teaching, clinical training, info products, masterminds and cohort-based courses, memberships and communities, brand partnerships and influencer marketing, podcasting, YouTube, hello, shout out, I'm in that part of their website, retreats. And honestly, like that doesn't even scratch the surface because there's so many like specific niche things you could do. I remember, for example, at one of my postdoc internships, I had a contract with the city school board that I worked in where I would consult for a fee on specific students and their IEPs, and if they had any sort of like behavioral concerns that they needed consultation on, to offer some feedback of like, here's how you might be able to support this student's well-being from a therapist's perspective. So sometimes it does take a bit of creativity to even come up with a list of what sort of side hustles are out there. I don't want to dedicate dedicate this entire episode to listing those out, but if you're having trouble listing them out, like ask around, ask your local Facebook groups. There's Reddit posts on this stuff. Like the list goes on and on and on and on and on. But now we're going to focus on some of your other questions about side hustles. As I'm scrolling through, I love this question and I want to answer it next. Someone says, can I survive without side hustles? I only want to be a therapist. Absolutely yes. Let's pause on this question for a little bit. When I'm making an episode like this one where I'm talking about side hustles and answering your questions about side hustles, I don't at all want to give the impression that the only way to make a living is by having some extra income on the side of your potentially full-time job. If your goal is to generate a reasonable living exclusively by seeing therapy clients, you can absolutely do that. You can do it without working at burnout levels. And I get that it's also a real question for many folks because therapists are on average so underpaid. So I get that there's nuance to this question. I'm just rattling off this like, yes, you can, without kind of filling in all the blanks. But if your goal is to see exclusively therapy clients to pay your bills and you feel like it's not paying your bills in the way that you'd hoped, there are ways that you can troubleshoot and problem solve. You don't have to take on a side hustle if that doesn't align with what your goals are. I just wanted to clarify that and make clear that when I'm talking about side hustles, I'm not approaching this from a lens of saying like, because this is the only way to make a living. I don't feel that way at all. But talking about that for me does bring up a follow-up side question of like, why would someone choose to do a side hustle if it is possible to generate all the income you need just from seeing therapy clients? And I think there's probably tons of different answers that different people would have to this question. Some of the things that come immediately to mind to me as I think of that are, one, maybe you enjoy the variety. Like you could see therapy clients full-time, but you'd much prefer to see therapy clients part-time and have something very different that you do to fill in the blanks for the rest of your income that maybe uses a different part of your brain or a different level of energy or something like that, that variety is something you really appreciate and thrive in. Or it could be more practically that seeing more than a certain number of therapy clients just isn't energetically sustainable for you. So maybe you could reasonably make enough money seeing something like 15 to 20 therapy clients per week, but your body energetically maybe needs to cap at something like 10 clients per week or less, then maybe you'd be a good candidate for a side hustle. Or I could imagine a situation where you want to make sure you continue offering care at a level that is significantly more affordable to more people, which maybe pays less, and you balance it out by supplementing your income through a side hustle. It could be that you're wanting to see if some other avenue could potentially be your primary source of income, but you kind of want to crack into it via a side hustle. So like you have your full-time job, but you're hoping to see if you can pivot to private practice. So maybe it starts as a side hustle and then it grows and grows and then it becomes your full-time income. Or, like I did, where I saw my therapy clients in private practice, I wanted to see if it's possible to start this online business. So I started doing it on the side and it grew and grew and grew until it became my primary source of income, and my therapy practice became, I guess by this definition, my therapy practice is my side hustle. It provides some supplemental income to my primary source of income. I'd be curious to hear from folks if you are kind of curious about starting a side hustle, or maybe you already have a side hustle, what your reasons are for wanting to do that. If I'm reflecting myself, there's a pretty long list of reasons, honestly, why I wanted to pivot into a different source of income that at first was a side hustle, and now, yes, it is my primary source of income. And that's one, just energetically, I thrive so much more if I can see therapy clients part-time instead of full-time. I can see therapy clients full-time, and I think I can provide pretty decent care doing so, but I am also going to feel pretty tired if I'm inching up towards 20 clients per week. And I have little kids, and little kids pulls the same kind of energy from me as I use when I'm seeing therapy clients, at least sometimes. So I have less of that energy to tap into and give from when I also have children. Another reason why I wanted to lean into a side hustle is I wanted personally to have more of my income generating hours to be flexible, meaning, when you put your therapy client on the schedule, that is their appointment time. Like I can't contact my therapy client 10 minutes before session and say like, actually, I do really well with the next hour being like a mental health hour and like working on our session, 3 hours from now. Like, you have to be steady and consistent. And I am with my therapy clients. I will only move them around if I'm sick or on some very rare occasion like that. My kids are sick or something like that. I'm not going to just sort of shuffle things around based on my preferences, because personally, that's not the kind of care that I want to offer to my clients. I want to be consistent for them. But with my side hustle, now turned main hustle, I move stuff around all the time. So I see my therapy clients on Wednesdays, 1 day a week. The other days, I can shuffle around all I want. And I do repeatedly. And I'm so grateful that I have this huge amount of flexibility in my schedule. But I could see someone wanting a side hustle for just like a couple of those hours a week to be a lot more flexible. That, oh, maybe I do those hours, while my child is taking a nap or sleeping at night. But if I'm too tired, I don't have to, but I can if I'm available, and that could generate a little extra income. Another reason why a side hustle is valuable to me is because I like the idea of being able to reach more people. When I see therapy clients, I often have felt that constraint in the past of, I can only see so many therapy clients per week. Period. Like, that's just a true statement. And maybe you could expand it by doing group therapy or something like that. But even then, it's still going to be limited. And personally, I really enjoy the idea of like, can I somehow like put things out there that are helping a larger number of people? I don't know what that says about me, but I do find it really rewarding that now I built this pathway where I can speak to a lot more people than could ever be possible if I was just seeing therapy clients. As much as I absolutely love the deep and meaningful dive into each individual's life that I get to do with therapy clients, like, I would also be bummed if I didn't have any therapy clients either, for the opposite reason of like, I can't go deep with anybody. So for me, it's really balanced to have like a deep dive with a very small handful of people on my therapy caseload, and a much shallower dive with a lot more people. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you. Okay, here's a good question. How do you balance running a business and starting a whole new side hustle at the same time? Someone else asked a similar question: how much time per week to spend on a side hustle? I think this is a great question. And to me, I would just say, tailor it to your needs and just manage your expectations accordingly. Like, if you have an extra hour or two per week to give to a side hustle, great. Give that hour or two to it if it aligns with your goals to do so. But if you only have an hour or two per week, it wouldn't be reasonable to expect that whatever you're trying to lean into with that time is going to generate the same amount of income or get you there as quickly as if, let's say, you had 10 or 15 hours a week to give to a side hustle. So personally, I think it's a much more reasonable question to ask, how much time do I have to give per week to a side hustle if that's something I'm wanting to pursue? And then to follow up the answer to that question by saying, okay, well, what sorts of things align with my goals that reasonably fit within that amount of time? Like, let's say you have an extra 3 hours a week to give to a side hustle, and you've been kind of thinking about, adjunct teaching a graduate level therapy class. You're probably not going to fit in teaching an entire graduate level therapy class into 3 hours a week. Just speaking from experience. That's probably going to be something that at a minimum is going to take you closer to 10 hours a week. And then depending on the context, who knows, it could be more. So don't try to cram something unreasonable into whatever amount of time you have. Take a genuine look at how much time you actually have, and then see what reasonably fits in that time. Like, let's say you have a very specialized training and you can offer supervision to other licensed folks who are interested in getting trained in the same thing, and you have 3 hours to spare per week. Well, maybe start by taking on one person who comes in maybe weekly for an hour, see how that goes before adding on, 5 more people who might not fit in the time that you have available. And if it's something that's less hour for hour that you kind of need to build up to over time, then you might just manage your expectations by pushing out the timeline. Like if you wanted to have some sort of online audience like I do, and you wanted to build it large enough to have like a reasonable income that helps pay real bills, if you have 1 hour a week to give to that, it'd be really helpful to manage your expectations that like that's probably not likely to generate any income for you for a really long time. So is that still worth it to you if you might be spending potentially a couple of years working on that before you're generating income from it? Are there other reasons that maybe you have for leaning into it? Like there's maybe information that you'd like to share with the world, even if you're not getting paid for it, and therefore it's edifying to you and worthwhile to you, even if it doesn't come with a paycheck. Before we dive into the next question, I'd like to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Powbox. When I first learned that signing a BAA with Google Workspace alone wasn't enough to ensure that your client emails were HIPAA secure, I signed up for Powbox. It's been a little over a year since then, and it's so simple to use, I almost forget that it's even there. It's like my own little personal elf working behind the scenes encrypting all my emails. Rather than require your clients to log into a portal or enter a password in order to securely receive messages from you, you can just message each other straight from your regular email inbox. Powbox integrates on the back end of your email provider and is completely invisible except for the Secured by Powbox badge at the bottom of your emails. Just follow a few simple steps to get it set up, and if you need help, Powbox's customer support consistently receives amazing reviews. If you'd like to check out Powbox, they offer a 14-day free trial to all users, and for the first 100 people who mention my name at sign up, you'll get an extra $250 off your first year. Just head to powbox.com and enter Marie Fang in the box that asks how you heard about them. That's Powbox spelled Paubox.com. Thank you again to Powbox for sponsoring today's episode, and now into the next question. Okay, and someone asks, how lucrative can providing clinical supervision be? Which I know I just kind of referenced, and certainly that would count as a side hustle because you're taking on side income beyond your typical primary income. However, I'm not speaking from experience, just from what I hear from folks, but you can like check on Reddit or Facebook groups. Pretty much across the board, what I hear from folks is offering clinical supervision generally is not particularly lucrative. And I'd like to add on my tag on thought that given that most of the time when we're taking on supervisees, we're taking on folks who are pre-licensed or somewhere quite early in their career and therefore likely quite underpaid, just kind of on average by definition pretty much. I would say that if you're thinking about taking on supervisees, it has to be motivated by something other than finances. Like, certainly, I think you should be compensated for the work that you're doing. However, if your primary goal is to have a significant income boost, I don't think dabbling in supervision is the route to go there, because then you're setting yourself up for a situation where you might be primed to further take advantage of a demographic that right now is already very taken advantage of. Like I've shared before, I have a daydream of someday, like definitely when my children are much older, taking on supervisees. And just in my mind, as I imagine it, I would love to be able to give something more like 5 hours a week to my supervisee. You know, it's like 1 to 3 hours of actual supervision time, and then being available for those things that inevitably pop up when you're a trainee, especially where you need to call your supervisor and also hear from them like kind of right away, usually, to move through some clinical issue that you're learning about. And I would love to be able to have that time on my schedule, knowing that I would want to also take as little compensation as possible so that my supervisee could pocket absolutely as much as possible because they need it more than I do. Please don't take this as prescriptive advice. I haven't supervised anyone before also, so, perhaps I'd say something different if I had. But for me, mentally, it's just so much better aligns with my values if I see supervision as a service to the community rather than a lucrative option, because I really, really, really don't want to end up in an unintentional kind of predatory relationship with someone who's financially disadvantaged. So if you'd like to supervise people from the kindness of your heart because you love training people, and yes, you'd like to be reasonably compensated for that, by all means, I fully support you. But if your goal is to make a bunch of money, please consider some other paths for the sake of our early career therapists. Is it different if you have some highly specialized training and you're supervising folks who are already licensed? Perhaps. I haven't dabbled in that. I know that's a whole world as well. And feel free to chime in for folks who've tried this before, but I imagine it could be reasonable to charge significantly more in those contexts. I realize also as I was talking about that, I'm kind of talking about taking on supervisees in a setting like private practice where I work, but perhaps taking a promotion in a community mental health workplace or something like that where you're having supervisees added into your salaried role and therefore also taking a pay increase. Perhaps that completely makes sense for you. And as long as it brings you joy to take on supervisees and you're equipped for it, maybe that'd be a great fit. But then that's not really a side hustle, I guess. That's just your job. Someone else asks, is it better to seek a project that is a passion or what can be profitable? I'm not scripting my answers to these questions. So let me think this through because my mind just went in a bunch of different directions. I think generally speaking, if you can find something that aligns with a passion, it's generally going to be more sustainable than if your only question is what's profitable. Now, with that said, I think it can be wise to be strategic and say, well, if my goal in having a side hustle is to generate some income, presumably, then we can ask, where do my passions and what's profitable overlap nicely? This is definitely what I did when I started Private Practice Skills. I think I've shared this story at some point, but maybe it's been a while. I don't remember when I last talked about it. But before Private Practice Skills, I was on a mission to teach, and I was looking for teaching through traditional methods by teaching students, maybe at college, maybe at graduate school, wanting to teach about therapy-related concepts. And I had the opportunity, I think it was an accident that I got this adjunct role this one time, but I appreciate it so much that I had it, where I got to teach one graduate level class to MFTs in 2018. And on the one hand, once I did it, I was so obsessed. I loved it so much that I knew I couldn't stop. And on the other hand, my paycheck at the end of the thing was less than minimum wage. And I knew that I also wanted to have children and I wanted to be at home more while I had children if that was an available option. And so if I wanted to keep teaching, it was not going to be sustainable for me to also be at home more with kids. And that's where my little brain gears started turning to say, can I keep teaching to do this thing that I'm so passionate about? But can I do it in a way that also pays my bills better than this route that I've tried? And that magical Venn diagram of where Marie's passions of teaching overlap with what's profitable is where Private Practice Skills was born, where now I get to teach and I get to do it on my own terms. And I was able to do it in a way that generates a significantly higher income than I would ever be able to earn if I was doing it through a more traditional teaching route. I'm going to stay on this thought a little bit longer because I do hear this come up a lot where folks say I need that side hustle from an income point of view kind of thing. I mean, literally somebody put their answer on here just says, I need one. I need a side hustle. And I empathize. Sometimes it's I need money. I need it yesterday. How do I get money? And when you're in that position to pause and say oh, well, what are you passionate about? And what's important to you? Your brain isn't in that sort of, to use a DBT term, you're not in wise mind. You're in survival mode. How do I make income now? Tell me and I'll go do it, in the 3-step program to make it happen. And if I were to imagine trying to build something like Private Practice Skills without the passion piece at play, just speaking for myself, I know that it wouldn't have worked. Now, does that mean that anyone who tries pursuing a side hustle just for the purpose of making money is going to be unsuccessful? Absolutely not. However, this particular kind of side hustle that I've chosen that's built on authenticity, building an audience, building trust with the people who are listening to me. Like, I can't do that from a survival mode state of mind. And if I tried to build a business just saying like, I'm going to build this online business and like make a bunch of money, and there's not this passion backing it up, I just know that I would have burned out pretty quick. And I think that's something that happens to a lot of people, a lot of YouTubers, a lot of coaches, even in the niche that I'm in of teaching therapists things. Like, if you're going at it from like, what's the strategy to make a bunch of money through an online business, and you don't have the passion, like I think it's going to tank. I think it's going to tank. Man, that's my bias. I could be wrong. I love to be surprised and proved wrong. So just take it all with a grain of salt. I can say though, it's way more fun if you follow your passion. So if you are in a position where you're able to see what your passions are, sit down, ask that question, and then kind of brainstorm, like, what are my options for monetizing my passion? Can I get creative about this in any way? Like, I think that's going to be a much more rewarding and sustainable route, and it potentially might be a more lucrative route as well, just depending on what you end up building. But I think a piece of advice that, take it with a grain of salt. This episode does not constitute professional or legal advice. I say that in the description box of every video because it's true. But if you're in a situation where your primary income is not sufficient to pay the bills, and that's your primary reason for wanting to start a side hustle, my recommendation would be to first check to see if you can change anything about your primary source of income. I think for a lot of people, changing something about their current role or pivoting to a different role that maybe pays a little bit better, if accessible, might be a better fit. I think at least sometimes when folks feel like they more urgently need to take on a side hustle in order to cover their bills, it may say more about, just your current pay may not be sustainable at where you're working. Or, maybe you might do well with taking on some skills as far as how to manage your finances so that you don't find yourself in that urgent situation. I know that it's not always an option to just like leave your job and find one that pays better. However, if you have a spare bit of hours in your schedule, it may be better spent, looking for a new job, at least sometimes, than it is spent looking for a way to generate income on the side of your current job. And I am speaking from an absolute bias as I say that at least for me, when I started my side hustle, I was generating enough income doing the job I was doing. I just wanted my time spent seeing therapy clients to shift while still being able to earn decent income. Okay, and kind of similar question, someone asked, how do you balance running a business and starting a whole new side hustle at the same time? For me personally, I was so passionate at the time. I didn't have kids or like other things pulling for my time. I was making enough income, seeing therapy clients, that for me, I just did an extra 20 plus hours per week on top of my full-time job seeing therapy clients. I squeezed it in the evening. Sometimes I stayed up till midnight working. Sometimes it was my lunch break. Sometimes it was Saturday mornings. And it was, for me, a way that I wanted to spend my time that I had available to hopefully someday be able to then scale back, which I was able to do. After about a year to 2 years, I really scaled it back. So for me, it kind of lived in the category of like the same way that somebody might choose to take classes in the evenings in addition to their full-time job. It's not typically something that you would see as like, this is something I want to choose to do forever, but maybe I might have the capacity to lean into this for a season because it's going to get me somewhere that I'm hoping to get to eventually. If, however, it's not accessible to do that, which I totally understand, because in different seasons of my life, it would not have been accessible to do all of that, then just be kind to yourself and see what time you have available and what capacity you have available and just work within the means that you have there. Okay, I'm looking at the time. I've been doing this for an hour, and there are more questions that I didn't touch on that were more practical, like, how do I actually start the side hustle? what to use to create and have mini courses. What about using affiliate links? And I love talking about that kind of stuff. And I haven't in a little while. I have a couple episodes where I do touch on some of that, particularly a live stream that I did, I don't know how many years ago, about how to start a side hustle, kind of in that sort of definition that I named earlier of like the type, what I thought a side hustle was, of like starting and creating your own thing. So I'll link to that below if that's something you're interested in. But if you are curious to hear more of my like practical tips of like how to start, I guess, this category of side hustle, it doesn't have to be YouTube, but something that involves generating some sort of online presence, or maybe you're creating something that you're going to sell online. I'm happy to do that. I just don't know how much people are interested in that these days. Like, I think it was kind of trendy back when I started Private Practice Skills, and like maybe it's kind of declining in trendiness. I'm not sure. I'm in my own little bubble. I'm doing it and I love it, but it's not for everyone, so it may not be something you want to learn about. So if you do, let me know in the comments, and I'm happy to address those questions in a different video. Well, I had fun chatting about this. If you're thinking about starting a side hustle, I think my most basic starting point tip is like, can you make a really low bar for yourself and just dabble? Like, just try it out. Just say like, okay, I don't know if I'm going to start this side hustle, but maybe I'm going to meet 3 different people who are adjunct professors because I'm thinking about adjunct teaching. And let me just have coffee with them and see what their experience is like. I'd love to just pick their brain, and no pressure, just try it. Just see what you learn. Or, you know, if you're thinking about starting something that involves some level of online presence, but maybe it's like courses and selling stuff, and it's a lot of steps to get there, to say, well, can you choose one social media platform that you're just going to create a profile for? And like, if the fancy strikes you, to like make a post or a video or whatever format you use, and just see what happens. And if you hate it, that's great data. You can take that data and do with it what you will. And if you like it and you get really into it and you're passionate and you keep posting more, great. That's also really helpful to know. Like, you'll see where you need to go next based on where that time leads you. So whatever you might be interested in dabbling in as far as a side hustle, like, it's okay to just lower the bar a lot. Like, forget about strategy for a second and just see, like, do I have time to just lean in a little bit, to learn more a little bit, to try this thing out just a teensy bit, just to see what that's like. Try it. It's like trying it on in the fitting room. Does anyone shop in person anymore? Anyway, I exclusively shop in person at thrift stores. So, you know, just try. You find all kinds of stuff at the thrift store, and I'll look at it, and now I've adopted the mindset of like, this might just be a little too crazy for me to wear. But you know what? I'm gonna put it on the fitting room and just see. And I might put it on the fitting room and be like, oh, Marie, that was not it. But sometimes I put something on in the fitting room and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna get it. And you know, just low bar, low cost. It costs you very little to just try it out, I guess, is my point. So why not? Set a low bar so that you won't regret it if you give it a try and it doesn't work out. Well, this is a fun episode. I appreciate you joining me. I hope this is helpful to some of you. Definitely a bit rambly, especially in this extended version of the episode. Let me know in the comments, like, do you have a side hustle? Are you thinking about doing a side hustle? Are you loving seeing therapy clients? It's your favorite and you want to do it full time for as long as possible? Like, I'm interested in all of it. Like, let me know in the comments. And if you have started a side hustle and found it successful, like, any tips you want to leave for other folks to glean from your experience are welcome as well. I appreciate all of you, chit-chatting in the comments together. And until next time, from one therapist to another, I wish you well.